to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest-running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Gill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In this week's episode, episode 305, we revisit the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail. We hope you enjoy. If you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. In late 2017, our friend Kellie, Gill and I undertook a 5-day walk on the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail. And to this day, this walk still ranks as one of our favourite hikes of all time. It was that good. In 2020, major bushfires decimated Kangaroo Island, including this trail and much of the Flinders Chase National Park in which this trail is located. It wasn't until around 2023 that hikers could again do unsupported trips. In this podcast episode, we catch up with hiker Julia Patton, who with a friend recently walked the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail. We're looking forward to seeing how the trail has recovered since the fires and what sort of experience you can expect if you do this walk. Julia, thanks for taking the time to chat with us on your recent walk.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Before we talk about your adventure on the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail, please tell us a bit about yourself, your general background and your hiking resume.
Okay, I'm pretty much your regular Australian hiker, I think. I live in South Australia with my family. I've got 2 boys, Harvey, 13, and Barnaby, 11 years old. And we do some family hikes together. Generally, though, I do hike independently or with a friend, and I'm also very involved with the only pack-carrying group in South Australia, which is called the Adelaide Bushwalkers. And aside from that, I'm on a committee for the Hyson Trail, which, as you know, is Australia's longest marked trail, and I'm the ambassador for Walking SA, which is the not-for-profit peak body for walking in South Australia. Hikes that I have hiked before, I'm recently back from Nepal, where I've hiked to Everest Base Camp and also climbed to the summit of Kalapata. I have completed hiking the Hyson Trail as a section hiker, and I've hiked many trails within Tasmania, such as the South Coast Track, Overland Track and Frenchman's Cap, Walls of Jerusalem a couple of times, Bay of Fires, 3 Capes, and earlier this year the Mount Anne Circuit and Summit, and other trails across Australia, including the Buller Huts Trail in Victoria.
So you sound like you've done quite a wide variety of hiking. So pretty much Australian-based by the look of it?
Yes, mostly Australia-based.
Now, for us, the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail, which is roughly 66 kilometres long, remains one of our favourite walks. Was this your first time doing this trail, or have you done sections or the whole of the trail previously?
No, I've never done this trail before. I've known about it because I'm South Australian and it's a hike that's in my backyard, so to speak. But I planned on doing it a little while ago. However, the fires that came through put all of that on hold. So when a girlfriend recently said that she was interested in this hike, I jumped on board with her.
Okay, no, that's good. Why did you choose it? So you're aware of it. Why not another trail? Why this one?
Well, my girlfriend said that she was very keen to do it and needed a friend, and I am always that friend to want to go on a hike. And because of the fires that had gone through and devastated the island, I was concerned that perhaps it was too soon after the fires. However, the track was open, so I thought it would be a good time to go and see what it was all about and see if the regeneration had occurred and the beauty of the trail, which I'd heard about from so many other hikers. So I was really just very keen to see it for myself.
Now, lengthwise, how do you find this walk? I mean, it's billed as a 66-kilometre trail. You sound like you've done quite a few walks. Was this going to be a challenge for you in any way, or you're quite comfortable with the distance?
Yes, I was quite comfortable with the distance. I thought that it wasn't a great distance for the number of days. 66 kilometres for 5 days. I wondered how that would keep me entertained, so to speak. I thought it'd be a lot of swimming in the afternoons and that sort of thing along the coast. But actually, with all of the side trips that are optional, we did every one of them, and it turned out to be more like 83, 84 kilometres.
Yeah.
And we did, hike every day and make the most of those afternoons with the side trips. So absolutely, we filled every minute of every day.
I think that's the thing with this trail. It's from my perspective, it's probably the ideal trail for first-time hikers who have never done overnight camping before. I think the Three Capes in Tasmania is a good first-time hiking trail because you don't really have to carry your tent with you. But this is probably the next level on where you haven't got big days. It's doable for most people. There are some hard sections, but it's the sort of thing that if someone who's never done multi-day hiking before, it's a good choice.
Yeah, it's a great choice, and there is touches of civilization on days 1 and 5, but the 3 inland days are very much a wilderness experience. So unless you're heading towards the coast and finding the remarkable rocks or the lighthouse, you really don't have contact with any other humans. So you do get to switch off, especially there's no phone cover. So you do get to very rapidly fall into that wilderness escape that a lot of us do love on trail.
Okay, now, what time of the year did you do this walk and why?
The walk we completed on Kangaroo Island was in October this year, and the reason why we did it at this time of year was to work in with our family calendars, basically, and October, it wasn't school holidays, so it wasn't going to be busy for us, and I also wanted to go there before the fire ban kicked in, before fire season, which would be November. It was brought forward even earlier than normal this year. It's very dry here in South Australia. So I wanted the opportunity to make use of the fireplaces that I knew were at camp, and there are 4 fireplaces at the 4 campsites, and the first 3 nights are fireplaces within the shelter, and the final night is a fireplace outside of the shelter.
Yeah, I think particularly that last day, your campsite's actually large and spread out, whereas the other nights are sort of, I think they're probably closer to the shelter and the kitchen area than the rest of the nights.
Yeah, I'd agree.
When we did this walk, there are options for doing unsupported or supported hikes. Do you know if these still exist? And were you doing totally unsupported for this hike, or you were getting your gear carried from site to site?
We did do it completely independent. So we carried our gear from the beginning until the end. And I know that there are other options still. We didn't come across any other groups, but I know that they exist. I've seen their happy little writings on the whiteboards at huts. So groups are coming through and perhaps using the camp facilities for lunch, and then perhaps nearby there might be road access, even if it's not a public road, and that's where groups are generally picked up and taken back to their accommodation. I'm sure that since the walk has only recently opened again, these groups will be more frequent. However, we didn't come across any on our trip, so we had a very quiet trail for the whole 5 days.
I must admit, when we did our trip, it was basically after Christmas Day, so Christmas to New Year's sort of period. We couldn't have picked a hotter time period. And there was one woman who actually left the trail, and she would have been with heat exhaustion by the look of it. But I think if I did it again, I'd love to do it in the middle of winter, just to see what it's like at a totally different time of the year.
That would be ferocious and wonderful at the same time, I think. So much of the trail, as you know, is very, very exposed, and the rugged coastline would be absolutely exhilarating to walk through in horrendous weather, knowing especially that you've got that magnificent shelter to walk to each afternoon or evening, and also the parks arrange for firewood to be put in a dry shed. So we've always got firewood for the comfort at night.
It's not a bad idea, really. I think there's probably not going to be a lot of spare firewood lying around, and I know the park services don't like you picking it up because it's some animal's home or potential home. So leaving what's in the bush there and just providing firewood means people aren't damaging the environment, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. And just knowing that it's there, you just need to walk to the shed and get the next couple of logs for the fire. It's great.
What was the trail tread like? I mean, from memory, it was pretty much sandy. Maybe along the cliff edges there was a bit of rock involved, but was it in pretty good condition?
The trail was in excellent condition. I'm trying to think of a better trail that I've walked at all lately. It was just about a yellow brick road, to be honest with you, especially to start with. So maybe on days 1 and 5, which see more foot traffic, they might be a little bit more maintained for the groups that come in and out on day walks. There's also the coastline, which you just talked about, with very jagged rocks, and I think that would be very hard on boots. So you'd want really good hard-soled boots for the jagged rocks along the cliff. And then, of course, there's the soft sand walking as well, which was a bit brutal on day 2.
Yeah, so we'll get on to that one. Now, as far as you can tell, has all the infrastructure been replaced? So with each of the campsites, there was when we did it, there was a metal shelter. There was some tables inside the shelter with some water and sinks and things like that, and water tanks and toilets. Was that pretty much what you had on your experience as well?
Yes, the facilities were magnificent and they have all been replaced. I did see some signs with char, and I know that they would have been deliberately left so we could see how the fire did come through these camps. And at one point I spoke to a ranger who said that the 4 days it took us to get to this point, it took the fire 2 hours to clear that area. So it was absolutely ferocious. So the signs, some were left deliberately for us to see, but the shelters were large. There were 3 tables or 2 tables on the inside of each shelter, a long, beautiful big kitchen bench that you could put all of your food inside. So it was sealed, so you could shut your food in so the possums wouldn't get it. And there's a sink with a tap and a filtered water tap as well for your drinking water. And yes, then there's also a table outside. And the toilet facilities, there are 2 toilets, one with a tap inside to wash your hands, etc., and another toilet with a tap outside. So a lot of options for creature comfort.
And did you filter the water, or did you rely on the water that was there?
I've got trust issues, Tim. After all these years, I actually filtered my own water and still sterilised my water. It was probably unnecessary. I know that these tanks were probably topped up by parks and it would have been completely unnecessary, but I've never been sick when I've looked after my own water, so I'm pretty set in my ways now.
Yeah, I must admit, I agree. And we, on one of the last day when we did our trip, I actually managed to get myself up at gutter level, and it was just full of possum poo and bird poo. That was ending up going down in through to the tanks, and at that stage, then that's what you were taking out, and they. Yeah, apart from the really big chunky bits, that it wasn't filtering for bacteria or protozoa. So I think it's a wise move. So
agreed.
Now the toilets when we were there were actually quite large. Sometimes you get these little tiny toilets where you can barely turn around in. From memory, what we were used to, they were quite large, and you could actually we used them to go up and wash because you could sort of strip off, and there was plenty of room to move. Is that still the case?
50%, yes. So every toilet that had a sink inside was absolutely big enough to have a party in.
Yep.
And actually, if the weather was completely awful, you could just about fit, not that you'd put a tent inside, but if you were that way inclined, you could sleep a few people on the floor of one of them if you absolutely had to. So there are those sorts of options or that sort of indication of space. And, there's toilet paper in every toilet along the way. One toilet actually ran out at one point before we got there. So I was happy that we did have our own supply for just in case.
Yeah, I must admit, I never rely on it being there. It's better off to have toilet paper. Doesn't weigh that much, and you're better off having it than not. What sort of gear did you use for this hike? What were your key pieces of gear?
My key pieces of gear was to start with my Big Agnes one-person mountain glow tent. It's a relatively new tent to me. Previous to that, I've been using a Z-Pax triplex, and that's just been getting a bit big, to be honest, even though it's still lovely and light. My Tassie Made Tier Gear -10 quilt, which apparently is no more in Tasmania. They're a retail shop, not a quilt company, which is really sad. I used a Cedar Summit Flame Zero liner, and I often use that whether it's with a Flame 4 or whether it's with my quilt, depending on where I'm going. And my pack is a 55-litre Dan Durston Capqua, which is also new to me, and it's light and it's magnificent. And I used on this trip a Thermarest Neo Air X-Lite, which is my lighter air mattress. My other really magnificent bit of kit is my Tasmanian-based Australian-made Bluey Merino T-shirt. I have a short sleeve and a long sleeve, so I use it as a layering option in cold weather, and I use it as just a normal T-shirt to hike in warmer weather. It's completely breathable, and I wore it all the way to Everest actually and back, and just wore the one shirt for a week at a time. And because it's so breathable, it really looked after me. And Bluey Merino also make shoots. So I had one around my neck on this trip when it was cold, but I also used another one to hold my hat on. And along that coastline, my ears would have frozen and fallen off and my hat would have blown away. So I was really happy to have those little bits of kit with me as well. And I've been trying out a Soto Windmaster, and it's a nice little cooker to go in my little Soto cup. In my titanium cup, my Tokes mug. So I've been enjoying having sort of a lightweight cook system as well. So that's pretty much the bones of my gear.
Okay. Now, did you have any days where you couldn't light your stoves, either because of fire danger or I'm assuming the weather wasn't that bad and you could get inside the shelter and cook when necessary?
Yeah, all of my cooking for breakfast was done at my tent, and at dinner was done in the kitchen. And I had no issues at all with wind and that sort of thing, even though I was using sort of a Soto Windmaster instead of my MSR. So weather didn't play a part in any of that at all. So I was pretty happy. Fires, it wasn't fire season yet. So every night we had a fire except the last night when it was actually very windy. So because the fireplace was outside, I didn't want to have a fire on and then have to use the water there to put it out, because I wasn't sure when the next water delivery would be and how much water was actually in the tank. So the wind stopped us having a fire on just that one night.
I must admit, I will quite happily sit by a fire. I will never light a fire. And really for that very reason, you've got to worry about have you put it out properly, and have you got the water to put it out properly, and I can, as much as I like it, I can do without it, and but if it is there, I will use it. So
absolutely.
Now, you briefly mentioned the beach walking before, and that's on day 2. That's probably physically the hardest section that we found of this whole trail, because the sand is so soft. What was your experience of this beach section?
Yeah, it was brutal. And to be honest with you, I spoke to a ranger to query how the entire 5 days was a grade 4. I thought that might be a bit tough, but then she reminded me that there's this element of sand walking quite soft and it's quite a distance, and that's pretty difficult for people who haven't got a lot of experience walking in that type of terrain. There is a high tide trail if you wanted to use it, but I wanted to stay on the beach. It was quite beautiful, and I had luckily packed my sand gaiters and kept all the sand out of my shoes. I think my girlfriend had a little bit of sand. Unfortunately, she didn't have sand gaiters. But I also had walked Deep Dean, which is a beach along the Cape to Cape in Western Australia, and I have PTSD from that still. So I knew to pack the gaiters, put my eyes on the horizon and think Zen thoughts until it was over.
The thing that really amazed me, there was 3 of us, and normally you find you're walking along a beach, there's normally harder sections and softer sections. I walked all up and down this beach between the dunes down to the water level, and the sand was equally as soft wherever we were. And what I was finding was I was bringing up the rear, and I was using both Gill and Kellie's footprints in front of me, which was a shorter stride for me, but it did harden up the sand a bit. So I think going second on this sort of trail is not a bad way to go, but it's a long, hard slog.
Absolutely. And imagine if we didn't have good weather, it would have been even harder with a headwind and just ferocious seas. And actually the seas were quite big, and we did need to be aware of the tide. So we had looked at a tide chart, but it was only that one day that we needed to know, and the tide was coming in. So it's good to be aware of where you are in the day and what time that tide is going to come in, because those seas, I would not want to swim in it. I'm not a strong swimmer anyway, but if you got caught in it, you'd be in a bit of trouble, I think.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I've spent a lot of time working on and around the ocean, and you never turn your back on the waves. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so describe a typical day on the trail, from getting up to your walking to going to bed at night.
From my experience in the hikes and trail, I have become very set in my ways in a few ways. I like to sit in my tent, and before the sunrise, I'm cooking my breakfast, and I've opened up my vestibule, and I'm looking at the kangaroos bouncing around and having a really wonderful moment every morning. And by the time the sun rises, that's my cue to get moving and pack down my tent and go and hang out at the kitchen, where my girlfriend Jana would be hanging out with a couple of other people that were on the trail. And they're probably a little bit more social than me. They would get up and have breakfast with each other. And then we would figure out what time we were going to go and depart. And that was basically 8:30 to 9 o'clock every day. It was pretty chilled. We didn't have massive distances to cover. So we were able to just not set alarms and just get up with the birds and the sun and go from there. And quite often we would plan on a break every, say, 5 kilometres or so, unless we had somewhere that we were trying to reach, such as, the Remarkables, the magnificent rocks. And we wanted to get there because we knew there'd be people coming in cars and buses and that sort of thing. So on that particular day, we did get out and on trail pretty early, so maybe 8:30, which is not too early, I guess. And we did enjoy some quiet time out there. And as we were out in the rocks, we did see traffic starting on the roads. Kangaroo Island's one of those places where you don't want to be driving at dawn or dusk. So a lot of people do rely on the sunlight coming up before they get on the roads, and then the animals will hopefully disappear, which means that by the time the sun was up in the sky, we pretty much had to plan to be gone from the Remarkables before all of the people got there. Yeah. So we would get to camp. Yeah, we'd get to camp soon after, maybe 2 o'clock each day, if not earlier, and then set up camp and have a little bit of a rest from however many kilometres we've walked, and then go and visit the local beaches, or the lighthouse or Admiral's Arch, that sort of thing. So, and then come back for dinner.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It is ideally set up for that sort of the newer hikers because of the distances. I think if we had one young guy on our trip who basically skipped the last day. He just he walked past us and just kept on going to the car park. So he didn't because there was no you're not supposed to do that, but it's more about you're not impacting on the number of people in a campsite each night. But because he skipped the campsite, I suppose technically that's fine.
That's it. And that last day is only 7 or 8 kilometres, so not much to add on if you're good with kilometres.
I think, though, the thing that probably, and I'll ask you this now, actually, there's the cave at the end of the track. Did you go in and visit that, or had you done that previously?
Both, actually. That's one of the things I had done before on Kangaroo Island. I had visited the caves and it was quite good. And this time I've come back and, it was magnificent. It's the light show that they've got there is something that's pretty incredible, and they've put a lot of time and energy into creating this experience. So it's something that I don't think people should miss. I can't believe I'm recommending a cave tour, but it was really exciting and very popular. So if you don't book, you don't get in. So when we first checked in to do the walk, they wanted to know if we wanted to do a later mid-morning or mid-afternoon cave tour. But I found out that there was actually one at about 9:30, 9:45 in the morning. So because we wanted to primarily get to the pub for lunch at the end of the hike before we got on the ferry, we just got up very early on that last day, and we walked in and checked in for the cave tour, and we had a ride scheduled with a ranger to take us back to the start and back to our car effectively, and that way we got to experience the caves. And the cave tour is included in the cost of our hike ticket as well.
Actually, what is the cost these days?
It's $206, I think, from memory, to walk the trail 5 days and 4 nights, and that includes the transfer at the end and the cave tour admission.
Yeah, no, that's actually pretty good. I mean, given you look at things like the Three Capes track, which is probably one of the dearer trails in Australia, but given they also spent $27 million on it, it's understandable. Being able to pay a fee and everything is done makes it nice and easy.
It was magnificent, and I think it was absolutely worth the $200 to do it.
What time did you typically go to bed each night? I mean, if you're getting there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you've got plenty of time. Are you a sort of person that if it's light, you're up, or do you go to bed at a certain time and that's it?
Yeah, because I probably get up with first light or sooner when I'm hiking, I'm absolutely in bed, hopefully by the time the sun has set. I'm not exactly a party animal on trail. I do like a little nip of whiskey at night by the fire, but as soon as the sun sets, that's hiker's midnight for me, and I'm probably gone.
Yeah. I find my problem is I operate on 5.5 to 6 hours sleep, and I have done for most of my life. And if I go to bed at 7 o'clock at night, I'm wide awake at midnight, and it's a struggle to stay in bed. But it's sort of the advantages of hiking in the middle of summer, I suppose, is you get the long days, particularly down south where the Kangaroo Island is. The sun's setting a bit later in the day, so you can certainly, you've got plenty of time to do what you want to do.
You do, and you've got those beautiful beaches nearby as your side trips to go and enjoy and have the sunset nearby, and know that you're only a half-hour walk back to camp or so. Absolutely, the daylight and the time of day, that time of year is, it makes it easier if you like to go to bed at 11 o'clock.
How busy was the trail? You mentioned there were other people, but I mean, how many people were typically at the campsites each night?
On days 1 and 5, we saw day walkers, and behind where the Kangaroo Island resort is, we saw a couple of walkers as well. But as far as groups, we saw none. And as far as independent hikers, there was one other couple, and they were really lovely. So we felt very happy to be with Julie and Rowan, also from South Australia. So they were the only other couple. They did the check-in with the rangers the day before us and got all the information and induction the day before us for their start day so that they could start nice and early. And we were pretty quiet on the first day, had a bit of a chat, but you know how it goes by day 2, 3, we are absolute family by the end of it, and really enjoyed their company, especially by the fire. It brought us together.
Now, one thing I thought of through here, on the last night of accommodation, as you're approaching that last campsite, we used to have a river crossing, for want of a better term, and there was a boat that was fixed in place on wires. Is that still there, or is there a different method of crossing now?
That boat is still there. Yeah, it's great. That was a bit of fun. And, I didn't take my pack off even to get in the boat and go across. So it was a bit of a risk on my part, but it was a bit warm, so I didn't mind if I probably fell in. But, it's really short but very deep, and we had good weather, so it was fine. I can imagine if it was cold and wild that short crossing would actually be a little bit hairy. And, it's really well set up. There's the rope on a pulley system, and you just, tuck 2 or 3 people in the boat and off you go. But, for us, you could almost swim across quite happily.
Okay. Now, speaking of weather, what was the weather like for your 5 days on trail? Did you have good weather all over, or do you have a bit of rain?
Yeah, we had a little bit of everything, not rain so much. I think it rained on one night. And apart from that, the days were relatively warm. My photos show me wearing a T-shirt a lot of the time. The nights were quite cold. So, even though the sun was shining, and I think I got a little bit sunburned at one point, actually, the night still managed to get closer to maybe 5 degrees or 3 degrees at night. So cold nights and warm days for October.
Yeah, I think that's certainly cool enough. And I know for a lot of people, particularly newer hikers, I suppose, they prefer a slightly warmer weather. So I can imagine late October into November, it probably would have ramped up with the number of people.
I don't think I would have bothered making a fire if we didn't need to sit by it either, but it was so cold. So to have a fire to sit by just kept us up that little bit longer with all of our layers on and, something to sit by and have a chat to each other by.
Yeah, I think it's one of those sort of things that most people often don't realise. You get it doesn't matter where you are, what time of the year it is. You can be cold, you can be hot, all on the same day. So it's always good to come prepared.
Absolutely, especially when you're doing a coastal walk and anything can happen, can't it?
Okay, now what was the wildlife and vegetation like? I mean, could you tell that the place had basically been toasted in a fire, or it had pretty much regrown?
That was the most interesting part for me, actually, because I was, quite worried about what I was going to see for the whole walk. I wondered if it was going to be really depressing and if they'd opened it too soon. But actually, the vibrant green regrowth that was occurring everywhere was magnificent, and it seemed to be growing around all of the sort of the dead trees or the trees that hadn't died but were still blackened. So the growth actually looked quite magnificent, the green against the black or the grey, and I was actually really pleasantly surprised by that, except on one occasion when I walked by a bush and actually there was a big black stump underneath it. So I carried that bruise for quite a while. As far as the wildlife goes, from day one there were more goannas than we could just about be bothered taking photos of. There were so many. I've never seen so many goannas in the wild before.
Yep. And
they were everywhere, and they were so happy to see us. They weren't bothered by us at all, and we'd wait till they got out of our way. We'd just let them do their thing because it was just magnificent to watch them. The kangaroos were really interesting to me as a South Australian. They look different to any other kangaroos that I've seen before. They're really dark, much darker brown than what I'm used to, and they've got black fur around the eyes and along the back and down the tail. They're absolutely beautiful. You can hear them thumping around a lot, but you don't see them very much. I think they're still very shy and not used to humans yet. And apart from that, there were wallabies at one campsite doing zoomies around the camp, and they didn't care that we were there. They were more interested in chasing each other around, so that was pretty cute. And then on the last day, right at the very end, there were eucalyptus trees, and we wondered if we might start seeing koalas, but thought we probably wouldn't because we hadn't had eucalyptus trees this whole way through, and koalas might not have been there yet. And then we looked over, and within a metre of us, there was this beautiful young sort of juvenile koala, and we just couldn't believe it. It was just so beautiful. And the bird life was picking up at this point as well. So we had an absolute abundance of wildlife, especially by the end.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the same for us. We saw a koala on the last day, so leaving the camp, heading off, within minutes of, probably within 5 minutes of leaving camp, and it was, if you look at the images on our write up, it was just crawling across the ground, and I thought at one point it was going to climb me. It just stopped in front of me and had a look. So, I know they were badly impacted by the fires, but it's good to see they're still around.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it might have been the same koala, Tim, same area.
What were the trail highlights for you?
Oh, okay. So many. I guess for me, I liked that it wasn't difficult to get here. And for us, we got up early in the morning and caught a ferry across, and a short drive later we were at the visitor centre. So very, very quickly we were completely isolated from city life and the routine of life and back into trail life. So we also had very little phone cover, maybe 1 bar of 4G at camp, if you're lucky, to get a couple of text messages out occasionally. So I really loved that straight away we felt very isolated and in the wilderness. The trail itself was challenging enough. And there weren't a lot of hills and mountains to climb, but the distance and the sightseeing and the changing terrain and the changing bush and scrub and that sort of thing, and all of the wildflowers that we were seeing, I found that really quite beautiful. I really loved, and I'd forgotten how much I'd loved the fireplace and a whiskey at night with my hiking friends and family there. So that was a real joy to look forward to for the end of every day. And also on this trail, around every corner, there's something even more beautiful than the last corner. And you think it just can't get any better. At the end of each day, I thought, wow, that was just so much more beautiful than I could have anticipated. And then the next day, I'm saying it again. So I was really surprised by just how much I loved this trail and how spectacular it was.
Now, I need to ask you, how do you carry your whiskey? Are you carrying a small glass bottle or are you carrying a plastic bottle with some whiskey in it?
A GSI actually created a really good little whiskey bottle, and it's got lines on it. And I like to think that those lines are days. So it's got 5 lines on it, so it's perfect for 5 days. So you know when to stop. And it's very light. So I've got a little hip flask made out of the standard sort of pewter or whatever it is, and it holds less whiskey, about 187 mils, but it's heavy. So changing over to this GSI for around about the same weight, I get another day's worth of whiskey, Tim.
Okay, I'll have to have a look at that one.
I'll send you a picture.
Now, what were the lowlights? Were there any negatives about this trip?
There was one negative for me, and bear with me. My negative is how much I noticed this beautiful beach life, the abundance and exquisite nature of all the starfish and the seashells, and then realising I live at the coast here in South Australia, and I realise how much our local beaches are being souvenired to death when I see the abundance of beauty on these beaches in Kangaroo Island that haven't had the same amount of tourism and people walking up and down them every day. Indeed, every time we went to a beach, we were the only people there. So we got these beautiful experiences with a seal popping up next to us, or, you know, you're looking down at your feet in the water and there's a red starfish and a blue starfish and all these amazing crabs getting around us. So I really loved just this absolute beauty that I haven't seen in the ocean before. And, yeah, I realised that that's because population basically are gradually souveniring our beaches to death.
Yeah, it's often the thing. I think most people probably aren't aware that actually taking shells off beaches is illegal. I don't think anyone's ever been fined from it, but it's more about if everybody does it, it strips everything off. It means the next person's not going to enjoy it as much. So it's good we still have these remote areas that we can still enjoy the pristine beaches. Absolutely,
and I would go back just to experience those beaches again. I still think about the beautiful crabs that we were just getting around in little rock pools, and, you know, how beautiful it was to swim at those beaches in crystal clear blue waters. It was magnificent.
Yeah, I think I managed to get sunburned on that day. We spent a bit of time wading in the water, but as I said, it was Christmas time or just after Christmas, so it was pretty hot. All right, now based on your experience, would you recommend this trail to other hikers, and why?
I absolutely would, and in fact, I'm going to lead a group of hikers there with my bushwalking club in October next year. So I am really looking forward to going back there with a group of friends and like-minded people from our community, and to show them how wonderful this trail is. And it's absolutely beautiful, but I don't want to say that it's easy, and I don't want it to come across as this is an easy trail. It's still very much a grade 4, and the wildness of it is, you know, the coastline and the rugged rocks and things that are underneath. But if it was horrendous weather, that would also be a little bit dangerous. The beach walking would also be considered such as well. So although it is absolutely beautiful and I'd recommend it to everybody, you need to be able to walk 20 kilometres a day consecutively, and you need to be aware of tides and soft sand walking and, you know, coastal cliff walking and just, you know, happy being walking in the wild wet weather and that sort of thing. So this trail could give it all to you. You could get sunburnt, or you could just be in ferocious winds for days.
Yeah, no, it's always true. Now, that just prompts me another question I hadn't thought about. When we did our walk on the first night, the campsite had timber tent pads. Is that still the case, or have they replaced it more with the natural granite sort of that they've done on other sites?
Yeah, it wasn't timber. So at each campsite there were 2 large platforms. Yep. I don't think it was timber, and we have freestanding tents. So we were able to set up our tents and use the hooks that they've got built into their platforms, and tie our guy ropes around that. So as far as, wanting to put some strength to our freestanding tent, we were able to. But in all honesty, I think apart from one night, we didn't need to. And there were rammed earth sort of tent sites as well, and a rock would easily sort of help you bash your peg in. And those sites had a few more ants perhaps than the platforms, but the platforms could easily fit 2 or 3 tents. So, if you're in a small group, you'd be no worries.
No, that's fine. Okay, now one final question. What's your next great hiking adventure?
I've got 2 actually. I've decided to hike the Snowies Alpine Walk, that new walk that's just opened up in Kosciuszko National Park.
Yep. And
I'm going to try and do it between Christmas and New Year. So I'm really looking forward to doing that, probably on my own, maybe with a girlfriend, and that will be coming home just before New Year's. So not very long. I've been looking at doing it for so long, and because I want to do the Aussie 10 or 12, the time has just never been there for me to do it. But with this sort of shorter walk, I feel like I might be able to achieve that. So I've got that up my sleeve, but mostly I've been looking forward to hiking the Western Arthurs Traverse in Tasmania for a long time, and that's finally booked in for the end of February. I'm very much looking forward to that with my crew.
No, that sounds good. And then you're also doing the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail sometime next year as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that with my mates as well. So, lots of little jolts of joy to look forward to in the next year, and, excuses to get out on the trail.
Okay, so we've been talking with Julia Patton about her recent trip on South Australia's Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail. Julia, thanks for taking your time to fill us in on the state of that wonderful trail.
Thank you for having me.
So that was our interview with Julia Patton, who not long ago undertook the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail. And for us, the reason we wanted to talk to Julia about her experiences was we did this pre the bushfires in 2020-21 that pretty much decimated the national park and the trail itself, which meant that it was really only open to independent walkers in late 2023. I think from my perspective, we've made the comment a number of times, this is certainly one of our favourite walks. And it doesn't really matter whether you're an experienced hiker or a new hiker, it's just a good walk. So listening through Julia's interview, she's an experienced hiker, she's used to doing some fairly complex and big walks, and she loved this walk as well, not so much so that she's going back with a group of friends from her bushwalking club later on this year.
Yeah, it brought back lots of memories for me and, lots of familiar things as Julia was talking. And I think that was part of why we wanted to get a sense of what it was like now, because it was so good before. It's certainly different, but does sound as if it is just as good.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't sound radically different. I mean, just listening to her talking about her experiences on the trail, it just jogged our memories of what we went through. So
I'm not sure that I remember much very, very green, lush vegetation, but
no, and we did our walk between Christmas and New Year, so it was pretty much the height of summer, whereas Julia did hers in sort of mid-spring pretty much. And there is a difference in the time of the year, and I would love to go back and do this as a midwinter or a late winter walk just to see what the differences are.
Yeah, maybe late winter. I'm not so sure about midwinter. I mean, when we were walking along that cliff top, we almost got blown off, seriously. So winter would be much, much worse.
Yeah. But I think it's one of those sort of things that, probably the main difference for me with her experience was the wildflowers.
Yeah.
Yes, we did have things that were flowering, but, she probably was there at almost the peak period of wildflowers, so there would have been a lot more bits and pieces out in flower. She was saying that there weren't as many people on trail, that, on the day that she was going through, there was only one other couple that were travelling at the same time as they were, and then she was picking up day walkers on the first day and the last day. So it's one of those sort of things that I think from my perspective, there's a number of walks that I find that are really good from a hiking perspective. The first one being the Three Capes walk, and I think that one is really ideal for those people wanting to do multi-day walks but who aren't really into the whole camping experience.
Tenting it?
Yeah, tenting it. So it's a good kick-off for the multi-day walks, and then progressing on to something like this one where you are carrying your pack, and you're not doing overly long distances. I mean, if you just do the walk itself, you're probably around about the 75 kilometre mark over 5 days. So that's not overly taxing. Although, having said that, day 2, when you're walking along the beach and it is very soft sand, that's a brutal day. It really is.
Well, you keep going on about that, and I just have to point out that I was in the lead and I was making the track that you were conveniently stepping into, as it were. You keep going on about how brutal it was. Thank you for making me lead.
Well, I had to do these little mincy steps to follow along. So that's really difficult when you're slightly taller than the person in front of you. So.
Oh, here we go.
But yeah, so that day 2, as Julia said, there is the ability to take a high tide version of that. So you do need to check your tide charts. But we were the same. We were aware of what the tides were doing. We had an early start to avoid the heat, and was certainly glad when we finished the end of that after a few hours of walking along the beach.
Yeah. Do you know the thing that keeps coming back to me is that word wilderness, and this is absolutely wilderness. You might see a few people on the first day and the last day, and when you step into those more touristy coastal hotspots, but really at any other time, you are alone, and it's just a fabulous experience.
Now, Julia was saying when she went through and did this, again, it was probably about a couple of months ago now, that the fee was $206. I think from memory when we did ours, we were about $156. So not too much of a difference. And I did say...
It's very cheap,
yeah,
I think.
I did say to the ranger when we interviewed him that I think you need to put your prices up. It's a pretty cheap price for what's on offer and the work they've done to put this together.
Yeah. The infrastructure is great. The experience is great. Yeah.
Now, my comment here would be is, Julia was saying that she only had one other couple that were travelling with them, and you can't... Even though the distances aren't extreme, you're not supposed to double hut. You can't say, well, I'll just keep on walking and bypass one campsite and move to the next one, because the idea is that the campsites have a maximum number of people allowed, and if you turn up the next day, you might find that the campsites are oversubscribed. So you're supposed to actually do the day by day. We did have a person on our trip that bypassed the last campsite and just walked out. It was only about an extra 7 or 8 kilometres, and he was, he'd reached our campsite about 2:00 in the afternoon, and doing an extra 7 or 8 kilometres the next day wasn't going to impact on anybody, and it wasn't going to. It was just a bit of additional walking for him. But certainly, the ability to go through and do this walk and know that you've got a campsite, and all the campsites are pretty good. I don't think we obviously got there to where we were going and picked a campsite that we liked the look of, but I don't think there was a bad tent site anywhere on any of the particular camps that we went through and stayed at.
No, it's definitely well thought out and well laid out. And, often when you go into a campsite, you can see the sites that, people have avoided because they're not as flat as they could be, or they might be a little bit moist, or a little bit too much dry grass, whatever it might be. But I don't recall anything like that in any of the campsites. They were all very, very good spots. So even if you turn up last, it wasn't going to be an issue.
No. A couple of other things that are worthwhile reinforcing. Julia said she tends to filter her own water regardless of what's on offer, and we're very much the same. And as I said, the filtration that they put in place for the water tanks is more about solids. It's not about bacteria or viruses or protozoa. So definitely go through and filter your own water. As I said in the podcast episode, on the last day, I actually managed to get up and have a look at in the gutters of the kitchen area where the water supply and the tank was, and it was just full of bird poo and possum poo. So definitely worthwhile filtering your own water, and that's a good habit to get into. The other thing with that last campsite is that's the campsite where you're going to see koalas if out of any of the other campsites. I know Kellie, who did the walk with us, she actually had a koala come up and visit her while she was in her tent and just had a look around to see what was going on. Didn't come and talk to us. But the next day, walking out of the campsite, we came across a koala. So I'm almost guessing maybe the rangers just throw a koala out of a cage and collect it after everyone's left, because it does seem to be that it's as you're leaving camp the next morning, that's where you tend to see koalas.
Yeah. Well, they did have to protect and remove a lot of koalas when the fires were happening. So hopefully the population's back up and hopefully they're not staged by the rangers. Thanks, Tim.
If you want to go through and listen to our podcast episodes on the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail, there's 4 of them. One is a pre-trip, what we thought and expected. We do have an interview with one of the rangers from there talking about the trail itself, interviews from the trail, and then our post-trip experience. As I said, it'll be very similar to what Julia has gone through and talked about on her episode. And it's good to see this track is back, and it sounds like people haven't discovered that it is available.
Yeah.
So do it sooner rather than later.
Get in there and do it.
Yeah, before it starts to become busy. Okay, that's all for this week's episode. We hope you've enjoyed. Bye for now.
And bye from me.